She sat across from him on a blind date, her hands trembling, eyes lowered, and when the waitress asked what she'd like to drink, her lips parted with a confession no one in the cafe expected. "I can't afford coffee." The room froze. Strangers stared, and the man before her, an elegant single dad, a CEO with the power to crush or console, didn't flinch. Instead, he ordered 2 cups, smiled softly, and set into motion a chain of events that would unravel courtroom battles, family secrets, and a truth that could shatter or save them both. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of a quiet cafe, turning the worn wooden tables into small islands of amber light. The faint hum of chatter mixed with the scent of roasted beans and a sweetness that reminded Adrian Cole of his daughter's shampoo. Gentle, clean, the kind of detail that clung to memory. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, polished yet unpretentious, and looked across the table at Nora Ellis. She sat with her hands folded, knuckles white, cardigan sleeves pulled down as though fabric could shield her from judgment. To anyone else, she might have looked like just another nervous young woman on a blind date. But Adrian's eyes, trained by grief and sharpened by courtrooms, saw the tremor in her posture, the exhaustion behind her composure. The barista arrived with a pad poised, the chalkboard menu looming above. Latte $4.75, cappuccino $4.50, black coffee $3.25. Numbers that seemed harmless to most, yet for Nora they screamed louder than any insult. She inhaled, and for a second Adrian thought she might order water. But instead, in a voice soft enough to be mistaken for shame, she whispered, "I can't afford coffee." The words landed like a gavel strike, silencing the table, silencing the air itself. She hadn't meant to admit it. Confessions like that weren't meant for first dates. Maybe not for any date at all. Her face flushed crimson, and she lowered her gaze, bracing for ridicule. Adrian did not laugh, nor did he shift awkwardly in his seat. Instead, he looked at her as though she had just told him the bravest truth in the room. His lips curved into a smile. Not the smug kind, not the pitying kind, but something steadier, warmer, almost paternal. "2 cappuccinos, please," he told the barista. His tone calm, measured, the same voice he used when steadying his daughter after a nightmare. The barista blinked, nodded, and scribbled, though her eyes lingered on Nora with surprise. Nora felt the sting of humiliation soften, replaced by something unexpected: respect. She had faced countless nights of calculating rent against groceries, bus fare against her brother's school supplies, but rarely had she met eyes that didn't flinch when she revealed the weight she carried. As they waited, silence stretched, but not the suffocating kind. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop, releasing passengers into the fading light. A boy ran past the window clutching a basketball, and the sound of its bounce pulled a memory from Nora's chest. Her younger brother Leo dribbling a ball in the cracked court of their neighborhood, laughing even after falling, his knees scraped raw. She clung to that sound whenever the world pressed too hard. She blinked, pushing the thought aside, and noticed Adrian's phone buzzing on the table. A message preview flashed. "Hearing postponed. Custody battle continues. Jordan Pike." He silenced it quickly, but not before she glimpsed the shadow crossing his face. The cappuccinos arrived, steam curling upward. Foam swirled into heart shapes that collapsed almost instantly. Adrian slid 1 cup toward her. "Don't apologize," he said quietly when she hesitated. "Courage doesn't need an apology." His words sat between them like a bridge. She wrapped her hands around the cup, warmth seeping into her cold fingers, and felt the first threads of connection tugging loose her defenses. Nora found herself telling him pieces of her life she usually locked away. Nights working 2 jobs, cleaning motel rooms that smelled of bleach and sorrow. Mornings skipping meals so Leo could have seconds. She spoke of her mother's death, of standing at a graveside with a promise that no matter how small her resources, she would keep Leo safe. Her voice cracked once, but Adrian didn't interrupt. He listened like someone who understood that silence, too, could be a form of care. Adrian's turn came slowly. He revealed less through words than gestures. The tiredness behind his smile. The glitter stuck to his watch from his daughter Mia's art project. The way he mentioned learning to braid hair, as though it were a case he'd nearly lost, but eventually mastered. He didn't need to explain the text about court. Nora pieced it together. Widowed, raising a daughter alone, fighting a family who doubted his right to nurture. She saw the lawyer's edge in his posture, but also the gentleness of a man who carried bedtime stories in one pocket and legal briefs in the other. The conversation drifted, carrying them both further from the awkwardness of that confession. Outside, the sky deepened, painting the world in softer hues. Inside, two strangers sipped cappuccinos they hadn't planned on sharing and discovered that sometimes the truth, naked and unadorned, was the most disarming invitation. For Nora, admitting she couldn't afford coffee might have felt like failure, but Adrian's smile turned it into something else entirely. A beginning. And as the last petal from the daisies on their table slipped onto the wood, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, life had decided to hand her a window after all. The days after their first meeting did not pass like ordinary days. For Nora, time stretched and folded strangely, as if the memory of Adrian's steady smile had left an invisible thread tugging at her whenever she bent over a sink of dishes at the diner or counted coins at the pharmacy counter. The confession she had blurted out, "I can't afford coffee," no longer replayed in her mind as shame, but as a strange kind of relief. And for Adrian, long hours in his office tower, filled with contracts and shareholders, carried a new echo of honesty. He had listened to countless depositions, but Nora's simple truth had pierced him differently, like the quiet sound of a lock giving way. One evening, they met again at the same cafe. This time Nora ordered tea without flinching, though Adrian still insisted on paying. Their conversation, light at first, drifted toward heavier shores. Adrian mentioned Mia, his daughter, and the tug-of-war with his late wife's parents, who had filed a petition to claim custody. His lawyer friend, Jordan Pike, believed the case was winnable, but warned him that courts often leaned toward stability, and wealthier in-laws presented a convincing argument. Adrian spoke with the calm tone of someone rehearsed in legal battles, but Nora caught the flicker in his eyes when he described kissing Mia goodnight, uncertain if those nights might be counted. She understood more than she wanted to admit. Her own brother Leo had grown into the center of her life after their mother's death, and though she was not his parent, the responsibility weighed no less. He was 12 now, lanky, with a laugh that could unravel her exhaustion. But beneath his cheer, Nora sensed fragility. Her shifts had stretched longer, and she often returned home too late to help him with homework. That week, her phone rang during their cafe conversation, the school principal informing her that Leo had been injured during basketball practice, his arm fractured. She excused herself and hurried away, only later realizing Adrian had slipped cash into her coat pocket for the cab fare. At the hospital, the fluorescent light stung her eyes as Leo winced through X-rays. His first words were, "I don't want you to lose your job because of me." Nora kissed his forehead, hiding the truth. She had already been warned by her manager for too many absences. The fracture meant weeks of care, appointments, and missed shifts. She sensed the walls closing in, yet she kept smiling for Leo, telling him warriors wear scars. Days later, the inevitable happened. Her boss at the diner pulled her aside, face tight with false sympathy, and told her she was being let go. "Too unreliable," he said, as if devotion to family were a flaw. She walked out with her apron folded like a shroud. That night, her phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. "How's Leo?" She hesitated, then typed back the truth. Minutes later, he was at her apartment door, holding a bag of takeout and a kind of quiet understanding that required no invitation. Inside, he crouched beside Leo, who grinned despite his cast. Adrian asked about basketball, about favorite players, and Leo's laughter filled the cramped room. Nora watched from the kitchen, her throat tight, realizing Adrian fit into the space as if he had always been there. His tall frame awkwardly perched on the edge of their worn sofa, yet radiating belonging. Later, when Leo drifted to sleep, Adrian turned to Nora. "You don't deserve to be treated like that at work. If you let me, I can help." She shook her head fiercely. "I can't take handouts. I've lived my whole life fighting to prove I'm more than charity." Adrian didn't argue. He only said, "Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's the courage to admit we all need someone." His words lingered after he left, echoing against the peeling wallpaper. She lay awake that night, torn between gratitude and pride, replaying his face lit by the weak bulb of her kitchen. Pride had always been her armor, but pride didn't pay rent, didn't cover Leo's medicine, didn't soften the sharp edges of fear. Yet she clung to it still, unsure how to let it go without losing herself. For Adrian, the evening pressed on his heart long after he drove away. He remembered his own past, not as the CEO in polished shoes, but as a boy raised in a town where his father's debts chained the family. He remembered the cold sting of eviction notices, the way neighbors' eyes measured worth in dollars. He had clawed his way out, built a career, but the memory of hunger still whispered in quiet rooms. Perhaps that was why Nora's honesty resonated. It was not weakness, but survival, the same kind of survival that had once carved him. As the week closed, storm clouds gathered both literally and figuratively. Nora faced unpaid bills with dwindling options. Adrian faced another court summons, his in-laws armed with accusations of instability. Their paths, though separate, were bending toward each other, pulled by struggle and the possibility of shared healing. Neither had said it aloud, but both sensed it. They were no longer just two people who met on a blind date. They were two wounded souls standing at the edge of something that could either break them further or knit them into something stronger. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, the kind of scent that clung to memories of final decisions. Adrian adjusted his tie with steady hands, though inside his chest a storm pressed hard against his ribs. Today's hearing would decide whether Mia remained in his custody or was handed over to his late wife's parents. The air was heavy with unspoken verdicts, and for a fleeting second he feared he would fail her. He thought of the small glitter star Mia had stuck on his briefcase that morning, her silent vote of confidence, and he gripped it as though it were a talisman. On the other side of the room sat the in-laws, their expressions sharpened with disdain. Their attorney painted Adrian as an overworked man, too burdened by corporate duties to raise a child alone. Words like instability and neglect darted through the courtroom, arrows aimed to pierce. Adrian clenched his jaw, refusing to let anger betray him. His lawyer, Jordan Pike, laid out evidence of Adrian's devotion: school attendance records, pediatric visits, photos of Mia at home. Yet the opposing counsel countered with whispers of Adrian's modest upbringing, painting poverty as a stain he could never wash away. The weight of those accusations pressed heavier than the gavel. And then, as if pulled by something greater than fear, Nora stepped through the back doors. She hadn't planned to testify, hadn't even told Adrian she would come. But as she watched from the gallery, her heart demanded she speak. The judge permitted her after a pause, curiosity flickering at the sight of this young woman with fire behind tired eyes. Standing at the witness stand, Nora described an evening most would dismiss as ordinary. The way Adrian had knelt on her small apartment floor, listening to Leo talk about basketball while balancing a takeout bag on his knee. The way he tucked a blanket around her brother with the gentleness of a man who did not know the child but loved anyway. She recounted the way Mia's name lingered on his lips, not as duty but as devotion. "A man who can give that kind of care to a stranger's child," she said, voice trembling but clear, "is a man who deserves to keep his own." The courtroom fell into silence, But the opposing counsel wasn't finished. He twisted her testimony, dragging her into the narrative. He pointed to her worn shoes, her job loss, the very words she had once whispered, "I can't afford coffee," as proof she was unreliable, that Adrian's association with her showed poor judgment. The humiliation surged hot, but Nora stood firm. "Yes," she admitted, voice unwavering. "I couldn't afford coffee that day, but what I could afford was honesty. And what Adrian showed me was respect. Money does not measure a person's ability to love." Her words hung in the chamber, simple yet undeniable, and something shifted like the first crack of dawn after a long night. At that moment, Leo entered the courtroom with a folder clutched in his small hands, his arm still bound in a cast. He had found something weeks earlier while searching for old photos, an envelope hidden inside a book of recipes their mother once gave Nora. It was a letter from Adrian's late wife, written before her illness took her voice. Jordan presented it to the judge. In it, she had written of her faith in Adrian, of her desire that Mia be raised by him, not handed to her parents. The ink was smudged with emotion, but the intent was crystal clear. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and even the stern face of the judge softened. The ruling was delivered with solemn weight. Custody remained with Adrian Cole. Justice, for once, aligned with truth. Relief flooded Adrian's body, but when he looked toward Nora in the gallery, what he felt was more than victory. It was gratitude etched with something deeper, something he hadn't dared to name since his wife's passing. Outside, the courthouse steps glistened with rain from a brief shower, and the air smelled of wet earth and hope. Nora stood beside him, Leo at her side, and Mia rushed into her father's arms, clutching his neck as though she'd known the outcome before he did. Adrian turned to Nora, words slow but certain. "You gave me more than testimony today. You gave me back my faith." She smiled, eyes bright with exhaustion and relief, and in that exchange the future unfolded, not as a promise of riches or perfection, but of something sturdier, shared strength. On the cafe table where it all began, daisies bloomed again days later, a small petal falling onto polished wood. As the sun sank low, Adrian, Nora, Leo, and Mia sat together, their laughter weaving through the aroma of coffee and cinnamon. It was not wealth or power that held them. It was resilience, truth, and the healing born from scars. In that moment, life whispered its final verdict. Love and justice, when chosen with courage, could turn even the poorest confession into the richest beginning. In the end, what began with the quiet shame of a girl admitting she couldn't afford coffee became a story of courage, healing, and the kind of love that rises when two broken lives dare to meet in honesty. Adrian discovered that wealth and status mean little without compassion, and Nora learned that dignity is not measured by money, but by the strength to keep fighting for those you love. Together, they showed us that even the smallest truth can change the course of a life, and that justice and kindness always walk hand in hand. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel or sharing your own story in the comments below, because the world needs more reminders that hope can bloom in the most unexpected places.